What is my IQ? It's less than it used to be because it declines as you age, quite a lot. So you start getting stupider from an IQ perspective at about 22 or 23. So, and the best way to regulate that is to engage in physical exercise, just so you all know. So both weightlifting and cardiovascular exercise are really good for the maintenance of intelligence. I don't know what my IQ is. I had it tested at one point. It's in excess of 150, but I don't know exactly where it lands. Now, I should qualify that to some degree. As your intelligence increases, the scatter between the different subtypes of intelligence, such as there are, increases. So you might say that there's only one way to be stupid, but there's many ways to be intelligent. And so I'm not overwhelmingly intelligent from a quantitative perspective. I think my GRE scores on the quantitative end of things were about 75th percentile, which isn't too bad, given that, you're competing against other people who are going into graduate school. But there's a big difference between 75th percentile and 99th percentile, and I think that's where I was verbally, something like that. So I can certainly see that I have gaps in my intelligence when I'm discussing things with people who are really quantitatively brilliant. My business partner, Daniel Higgins, is quantitatively brilliant. I've got an edge on him verbally, but he's definitely got an edge on me quantitatively. And I've had students like that too, who could pick up statistics. I had one student who was a little on the autistic side, and she was a woman. Man, that woman, she was so damn smart. She learned how to write, moved from credible writer to an excellent writer in about 4 months, which was stellar. And she moved from not knowing a damn thing about statistics to being able to teach it to Harvard undergraduates at an award-winning level within a year. It's like, that just made my jaw drop. Now, she had a hell of a time presenting herself properly in public when she was doing public presentations. So, she had other gaps in her ability, but, I can hold my own verbally, and I'm rarely in a situation where I feel like I'm at a disadvantage verbally. But that's certainly not the case quantitatively. I feel at a disadvantage very frequently quantitatively. So
you can really impair people by putting them in situations of deprivation. And so one of the things that's happened over the last century is the mean IQ has gone up 7 points per generation, which is a lot. It's really a lot. So 15-point IQ difference is the average difference between the typical high school graduate and the typical college graduate. So 15 points is 4 years of university, roughly speaking. 7 points in a generation is half the difference between a high school student and a college graduate. And it's gone up 7 points a generation every 15 years. It's a lot. And so is intelligence mutable? Well, there's some evidence that it is. Why did it happen? Well, partly because there are far few extremely deprived people. Even on the information front, some of this was the introduction of television. You hear television makes people stupider. It's like, no, it makes smart people who could have been even smarter if they would have read Shakespeare, stupider than they would have been if they read Shakespeare if they're watching TV. But if you're a deprived kid and sitting in the crib with no one paying attention to you for 3 years, TV is way better than that. And so if you give people access to information and access to enough food, let's say, you pull up the bottom end of the cognitive distribution tremendously. And a tremendous amount of that has happened all over the world in the last 100 years. And that's a great deal for everyone because, well, that's that much more brain power that's available for everyone to benefit from. It's unbelievably valuable, and you can see the cascade in that part of our technological transformation. It's so incredibly fast. It's like, well, the Chinese are producing as many engineers every year as the Americans have engineers. One or two other things to be considered, and a very large percentage, for example, of Harvard undergraduates, and there's only about 4,000 of them, so it's a rather small school, were valedictorians of their class. And they have very high SAT scores, and the SAT is a proxy for IQ. The people who administer the SAT don't like to admit that, but there's absolutely no doubt that it's the case, because any set of questions that assess general knowledge and problem-solving ability you can derive an IQ score from. And so part of the advantage of hiring an Ivy League graduate isn't the fact that they went to a high quality school, it's the fact that it was impossible to get in. And so the screening has been done for the employee, for the employer, by the admissions process at the school. And the same thing is true of business schools, and the people who run business schools know that, is that the primary value that they offer, and again, this is not the case with every business school, is the fact that if you hire an MBA from their program, and it's a very selective program, then you have a very high probability of hiring someone who's intrinsically intelligent and conscientious. And that's a great predictor, those are great predictors of long-term success. So, and what would you expect in a society that's essentially meritocratic? It's pretty straightforward to think this through. Not only should people who are faster and smarter be more productive, especially if they're hardworking, but that's really what you'd want, isn't it? I mean, how the hell do you want to set up your society? You want to set up your society so that incompetent people who do nothing succeed? That first of all, that can't happen. So, you know, and I should say that I'm very aware of the unfairness of a meritocratic society, of its intrinsic unfairness. So let me give you an example. I had someone write me the other day. He had listened to some of my lectures on IQ, and he sent me his IQ scores. And he was in the 5th percentile, which basically meant that 95% of the people around him were faster cognitively than he was. And you know, the letter it wasn't very grammatically correct, and it wasn't very well written, although it was very sad. And he said that he had a very difficult time finding a job and keeping one, that he was constantly frustrated and unnerved. And that's a terrible thing, you know, because it's not as if it's his fault. A lot of what constitutes your innate cognitive ability, or your cognitive ability, is something that's really granted to you by fortune and fate. And I mean, you can make someone stupider, but it's very difficult to make someone smarter, although hard work definitely is a plus. People stack up at the bottom, and it's not easy to figure out how to deal with that, but because you need the people who are leading the cognitive revolutions to develop entrepreneurial enterprises and to run things properly and to invent the new things that we all use, and hopefully to raise the living standards of society in general.